Before we begin, there's a link in the description to join the email list. Subscribers receive carefully researched ebooks, detailed videos showing real DIY woodworking projects built step by step, and timber-focused material that isn't published publicly. It's long-form work meant for people who want to understand wood beyond surface treatments and modern shortcuts. Now let's begin. The most durable outdoor timber was never protected the way we protect it today. Modern construction tends to approach outdoor wood with a single goal in mind: isolation. Keep moisture out, seal every surface, and rely on chemical treatments or coatings to hold the line. When those measures fail, as they inevitably do, the failure is treated as unavoidable. Old builders worked from a different assumption. They knew that outdoor timber could never be isolated from its environment, only managed within it. Rain, humidity, frost, sun and soil were not enemies to be sealed out completely. They were forces to be anticipated, guided, and allowed to pass through without lingering. The protection method they relied on was not hidden in a recipe or a product. It was embedded in form, placement, and exposure. And once you understand it, you begin to see how often modern construction works against it. Wood does not fail outdoors because it gets wet, but because it cannot dry. Trees evolved to live outdoors. Their wood is naturally equipped to handle cycles of wetting and drying. The problem begins when those cycles are interrupted. Old builders understood that decay depends less on the presence of moisture than on its persistence. Timber that becomes wet and then dries fully is far more durable than timber that remains damp for extended periods. This understanding shaped every decision they made about outdoor construction. Modern protection methods often slow moisture entry, but they slow drying even more. When water eventually finds a path inside, through a joint, crack, or fastener, it becomes trapped. The wood stays wet longer than untreated timber would have, and decay begins quietly. The old method did not try to prevent moisture entirely. It ensured escape. Elevation was one of the oldest and most effective protection strategies. One of the simplest outdoor protection methods used by old builders was elevation. Timber was lifted off soil, stone, and standing water whenever possible. Posts sat on stones rather than being buried. Sills were raised above grade. Floors were ventilated from below. This separation reduced prolonged moisture exposure and allowed air to circulate freely. Even when rain soaked the wood, drying could begin immediately. Modern construction often places timber in direct contact with moisture-prone materials and relies on chemical treatment to compensate. This shifts responsibility from design to chemistry, with mixed long-term results. Old builders treated ground contact as a design problem, not a material one. Shape and geometry were used to move water away from vulnerable fibers. Outdoor timber was rarely left flat where water could pool. Horizontal surfaces were crowned, and edges were chamfered. Joints were undercut. These shapes encouraged water to leave the wood quickly. This was not decorative tradition, it was functional geometry. End grain, which absorbs moisture readily, was protected by overhangs or oriented downward where water could not sit. Airflow was considered as important as shelter. Old outdoor structures were rarely airtight. Barns, sheds, bridges, and even dwellings were designed to breathe. Airflow removed moisture generated by weather and use, preventing damp conditions from persisting. Cladding systems were layered to allow air movement behind boards. Roofs vented naturally, and walls dried from both sides. Modern construction often prioritizes enclosure and tightness, even where it is not strictly necessary. Timber trapped inside these systems loses its ability to regulate moisture naturally. Old builders accepted air as an ally rather than a problem to be eliminated. Oils and surface treatments were secondary, not primary, protection. Historic use of oils, tars, and lime-based washes is often misunderstood. These treatments were not meant to create a permanent barrier. They were meant to moderate moisture exchange and protect surfaces most exposed to weather. They were breathable, renewable, and, well, expected to wear away over time. Reapplication was just part of normal maintenance, not really a sign of failure. You know, modern coatings often promise permanence, but when they fail, they do so unevenly, trapping moisture beneath the intact sections. The wood suffers not because it was untreated, but honestly, because it was over-confined. Old builders, they relied on design first, and surface treatments only came second. The old method accepted maintenance as part of longevity. Durability wasn't defined by the absence of work. It was really defined by the ability to maintain and repair without having to replace entire systems. Sacrificial elements were common. Fence rails, sleepers, and cladding boards were designed to be replaced, while the main structure endured. Joints were accessible, wear was visible. Modern systems, on the other hand, often hide deterioration until replacement is, well, unavoidable. The structure fails as a whole rather than aging in parts. Old builders protected timber by planning for its eventual wear. Environmental exposure was managed, not denied. Sun, wind, rain, and frost. These were considered predictable forces. Structures were oriented to minimize exposure where it mattered most. Overhangs shielded walls, and roof pitches were chosen for local weather patterns. These decisions reduced how often timber became saturated and how quickly it could dry afterward. Modern construction, though, often applies the same standardized solutions across all sorts of climates. The protective burden shifts to materials rather than design. Old builders understood that environment couldn't be standardized, only respected. Failures taught lessons that became tradition. Old builders learned from structures that failed and those that endured. Knowledge was passed down not as theory, but as observation. What rotted first was noted, and what lasted longest was repeated. These lessons became conventions that looked traditional, but were, in fact, rooted in material reality. Modern construction often loses these lessons because failures are hidden, replaced, or attributed to factors beyond design. The old protection method survived because, well, it worked often enough to become trusted. So what does this method reveal about survival and resilience? Outdoor timber protection was never about defeating nature. It was about working within its limits. Wood that could dry, breathe, and shed water lasted longer and, frankly, failed more gracefully. For those interested in resilience and long-term survival, this approach really matters. It reduces reliance on specialized products and increases reliance on understanding. Old builders protected timber by aligning with how it behaves, not by trying to override it. The outdoor timber protection method old builders used was not secret or complex. It was grounded in observation, patience, and respect for wood as a living material. Modern construction often ignores it, not because it stopped working, but because it requires more thought at the design stage and more acceptance of natural change. Understanding this method reconnects building with reality. It leads to structures that age visibly, predictably, and importantly, repairably. If you want more material like this, including deeper explanations and real project observations that aren't shared publicly, you can join the email list using the link in the description. That's where the longer conversations continue. Thanks for spending this time with Echoes of Valor.